All right, welcome everybody. It's the top of the hour. It's 11 a.m. Pacific time and 2 p.m. Eastern, and we know it's many other time zones represented through the participants in this conference. So we're excited that you're here to join this session by Arrow Hill called Supporting Queer and Transgender Online Learners, Understanding Anti-DEI and LGBTQ plus Legislation. Before we begin, I'd just like to go through a couple minor details. One, the captions have been turned on if you choose to use them. They are automated captions, but they work passably well. And you turn them on by using the button at the bottom of the Zoom screen that's marked caption. Or if it's hiding from you, it might be under the button that says more with the 3 dots. And then you'll choose captions from the menu and turn them on yourself. Next, today is a day of analysis. This is a discussion led by Arrow. And so we hope that you will join. Because this session is being recorded, if you wish to keep your camera off, if you don't want your voice to be captured, then you're welcome to use the chat to pose your ideas, ask any questions that you might have, and so on. And so with that, let's welcome Arrow to the stage. Arrow, the microphone is yours.
All right, hello and welcome everyone. I'm so excited to see you all. This is my first time presenting at the Peralta Equity Conference and I'm super excited. So I am going to share my screen and we can start our conversation. So as Kevin said, my name is Arrow Hill. I am a current master's student at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And I'm currently filling out my finals. So it's a busy season for me and for students everywhere, I can imagine. And today we're going to be talking about supporting queer and transgender learners online and understanding the legislation that's been floating around. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to have kind of an overview of some of the things that are impacting LGBTQ learners everywhere, regardless of whether they are online learners or not. LGBTQ people in general. We're going to talk about why it's important to be discussing this and be in conversation with each other about what we can do. And then finally, we're going to move on to a discussion where we're going to get to build some knowledge collectively and hear from you all on what you think, along with some strategies that I have compiled. There we go. Before we begin, I just want to take a minute of silence to kind of recognize the lives that have been lost in Gaza. Over 38,000 people have lost their lives, and I think it's important that we honor them. So we'll take just a couple seconds of silence to honor their spirits. All right, now we're going to move on to a little bit of an overview. And I just want to mention, I know Kevin already said this, but if you would like to have your camera off, that is fine. If you would like to put your responses or comments in the chat, that is also fine. I will note that I am not quite as adept as I would like to be in kind of monitoring the chat and talking at the same time. So if you would just, if someone would take on the charge of alerting me if there are any comments in the chat, we can definitely shift our focus to those two.
I'll be happy to do that for you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. All right, so we're going to move into a summary of some of the issues that are impacting LGBTQ people at large. Mainly what we're going to be talking about today is anti-DEI and anti-LGBTQ legislation, specifically in education. This encompasses curriculum censorship, which means you're not allowed to teach LGBTQ themes and topics in public institutions or institutions that receive federal funding. And also forced outing laws. This is more impactful in K through 12 contexts, but it is also impactful in higher education and in online contexts because nothing exists in a vacuum. Education cannot and will never exist in a vacuum. So all of this is impactful to pretty much everyone. Everything is always connected. The next one down on the little pyramid is bathroom bills. So I'm sure that most, if not all of you, have heard about bathroom restrictions for transgender individuals. Basically, what this means is trans people are being prevented from using the facilities that correspond with their gender that they have identified for themselves. And they are being forced to use essentially the wrong bathroom. And then the next one down is bills that are trying to prevent drag, which is taking on the persona of a gender other than the one you were assigned at birth for performance purposes. And anti-drag bills are particularly insidious because life is essentially a performance. So people who are presenting as genders other than their gender that people perceive them to have been assigned at birth are at risk of being harassed under this bill. And then barriers to accurate identification, this is more paperwork. So if somebody would like to get the marker on their driver's license removed or changed to a different gender marker, these bills are making it a lot more difficult to do that. Additionally, birth certificates. And then healthcare and sports, this one is the last one that is kind of impacting LGBTQ people on a larger scale. So healthcare and sports, essentially for healthcare, making it difficult to medically transition and access gender affirming care. And then for sports, making it very difficult or impossible to play in leagues and in teams where there is a gender distinction. So like men's teams, transgender men who are assigned female at birth but identify as men are not able to play as men, just for example. And as it says on the side, each of these pieces of legislation harms the queer and trans community in some way. And that's why we're talking about them, because again, nothing exists in a vacuum. And if these issues are happening in the world, people in your classroom or people that you're interacting with are dealing with these issues. Now, the ACLU is currently tracking about 478 bills in the current legislative session, which is in 2024. But in 2023, there were 510 bills, and this has more than doubled since 2022. And depending on the criteria that you use to determine whether or not a bill is actually harming queer and trans people, some of the criteria is more broad. The number can skyrocket to, I think, over 700 at this point. And I think a lot of the mainstream media intends to paint this issue as kind of a they're not here scenario, where they're saying, oh, it's happening in Texas, it's happening in Florida, but it's not happening here. This kind of dispels that myth. 47 states introduced one or more bills that harm queer and trans people in 2023. 17 had 10 plus. So it's really a national issue at this point, and it's a crisis that we need to be talking about. And 163 of these bills are advancing. So many of them have luckily been defeated, but also 108 have passed into law. So that's essentially why we're talking about this and why it's important to be in discussion with one another. And this is just another visual depiction of the legislation over time. So as we can see, it has skyrocketed in 2023 and 2024, almost tripling for specifically anti-transgender legislation. And we can see the emergence of a broader field of education, which is what we're essentially talking about today. I believe in 2023, there were 171 bills that were targeting education, which is the forced outing policies and the curriculum censorship, along with some other miscellaneous education related bills. And then in 2024, I believe there were 173. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the importance, and I wanted to put a content warning here. If anybody needs to turn off their camera or step away for a minute, we are going to be talking about some things that might be a little bit distressing. So just take care of yourself, please. So these bills are providing a framework for violence to be emboldened internationally at this point. Michael Knowles, who is a conservative right-wing actor in the media, at a conference said publicly to a crowd of people who then cheered for him for this statement, for the good of society, transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely. So we are not noticing these bills come out of nowhere. It's from a place of hatred and from a place of ignorance. And we need to be very conscious of what they symbolize, honestly. And then at the university at Waterloo in Ontario, 2 students were attacked with knives during a gender studies course, and the police in their investigation determined that it was a hate-related crime. So we are noticing an uptick in violence internationally. And then from a recent national survey from the Trevor Project, which is a national LGBTQ+ organization, nearly 1 in 3 LGBTQ young people said that their mental health was poor most of the time or always due to these policies. So we're just seeing a direct link between mental health and these policies. And then nearly 2 in 3 LGBTQ young people said that hearing about potential state or local laws banning discussion of LGBTQ people made their mental health a lot worse. And you might be thinking, my institution serves people who are a little bit older, or I don't really interact with young people on a regular basis. This is still very important because we're thinking ahead to the future. These young people who are in K-12 education now might come to your institution in the future. So it's important to realize what they're going through in order to support them in the future. All right, now we are moving on to more of a discussion. So I am going to switch my screen actually after people have a chance to scan the QR code in the corner or write down the code on the left. Give you a couple seconds to do that. And then I'm going to switch it. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit more about actual strategies that we can use in order to support our queer and transgender learners. And I want to hear from you all first. Oh, I see a chat. Oh, thank you so much, Chelsea, for putting that in the chat. That's amazing. All right, now I will switch to here so that I can present. Let me see. There we go. All right. Hopefully it's working. Can we all see the Mentimeter? Amazing. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much. So this is kind of just a collective knowledge building activity, and then we'll go into a couple strategies that I have compiled. Honoring pronouns, yep. Educate, being mindful of pronouns. I see that's a common theme among the responses. Representation is a huge one. Yeah. And imagery too, yeah. Open dialogue, that's one we're going to talk about. Amazing. Support, definitely. Ask the students, yep. We're going to talk about that one too. And if anyone is having trouble accessing the website, please just let me know, and you can either shout it out or put it in the chat. And this word cloud will be available to you after this session, so definitely feel free to come back to it. Yeah. Safe spaces. This is beautiful. I'm going to give about another 30 seconds just to make sure everybody has a chance to put something in if they would like to. All right, I'm going to stop sharing, but if you would like to continue contributing to, oh no, I'm not going to stop sharing. I'm going to exit this Mentimeter. Sorry about that. Oh, I saw another one pop up. LGBTQ authors. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. All right. We're going to exit. Wait, allow me to. I might need to stop sharing for a second. All right, I'm going to stop sharing and then reshare my screen when it goes back to the presentation. Sorry about that. There. Same screen. There it is. Can everyone see it again?
Yes, we can.
All right, perfect. We're going to go back into the slideshow. And I noticed a lot. Oh, screen sharing stopped. Let's try it again. All right, can we see it again? I'm not sure why it put on me, but all right.
We're good.
Amazing. So we're going to talk a little bit more about some strategies that have been researched and that I have come up with. So one of them is awareness. This is a huge one because, as I said, mainstream media hasn't really picked this up as the national crisis that it is. So drawing attention to what's happening and making an effort to inform others about the harm that it causes, both psychological and physical, in terms of mental health effects. And then consideration, so clarifying what steps can be legally taken by you or your institution to mitigate the damage of the legislation. Much of the legislation that is floating around at this point that specifically concerns public institutions and institutions that receive federal funding is not allowing them to require DEI trainings or trainings that focus specifically on centering LGBTQ learners, but rather they prohibit making it mandatory. So you can still have them theoretically in most of these states, but you're not allowed to make people go essentially. And then action, so making policy and practice interventions as able. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that next. So I noticed that a lot of us were making a note of pronouns, and I think that this is especially important when we're talking about serving transgender online learners. I want to just clarify modeling the use of pronouns. So as you can see, I put my pronouns in my little Zoom name for synchronous sessions, and modeling them in introductions for asynchronous courses. So if you send a note to your learners saying, hello, this is me, this is my name, this is my position at the university or institution, and then these are my pronouns. That is amazing and very, very important. And encouraging your students to share their pronouns is also very amazing, but never requiring your pronouns is very important because that can force people into a very uncomfortable kind of tension between outing themselves if they use they, them pronouns or pronouns other than ones that they would be perceived to use, or kind of displaying their identity to people that they might not be comfortable sharing it with. And then interrogating assumptions, as I said, it's very important not to make assumptions about any of your learners. It's important to never assume that somebody either is or isn't LGBTQ+. You cannot tell from looking at someone what their identity is. You would have to ask them. It's really, really, really key to kind of interrogate your assumptions and say, okay, why am I thinking that this person identifies in this way? And kind of question that to the point of, maybe I should ask them, or maybe I should just not make assumptions essentially, because that can put their safety in jeopardy, honestly. Safety is another big aspect of disclosure. So if somebody wants to disclose their identity to you, that is wonderful. That means they have a bond of trust with you. And it should never be an expectation because safety is really important to preserve in states that are particularly hostile in the current sociopolitical climate. And then the next kind of category of things to just make note of is understanding. So building community and empathy. I have noticed a lot of sessions in the Peralta Equity Conference focus on building empathy and building community in online environments. These would be a great place to start. Building trust is really, really key to learners feeling safe in your Zoom room or on your platform, whatever you use to kind of educate your students. And also using learner-centered practices and kind of just building a culture of understanding into your course. So essentially what I'm meaning to say here is don't assume that students are not trying very hard or are kind of slacking off if they're not able to submit an assignment on time, if they're not able to make it to a Zoom class or whatever it might be. Kind of build in this understanding, this broader understanding of maybe they're dealing with something bigger than this class. Maybe this class is secondary in their life at this point. And kind of, yeah, just building an understanding to your course. And also being open and vulnerable to conversations, synchronously or not. So if you are having a conversation over email, that is also very valuable. A lot of times, LGBTQ plus people find a lot of community in online spaces, so they're already used to that. And sometimes it can be easier to have hard conversations asynchronously rather than synchronously, where it might feel more vulnerable. And then choice, so building in choice and a variety of options of engagement and topics to choose from, especially in humanities classes, but also in STEM classes. And choosing a lot of materials. I saw representation come up a bunch in our word cloud. That is definitely really important. Making sure that you build in representative resources that are positive is really, really key. And just building in a lot of different choices for your learners to engage with different topics. A lot of the time with this legislation, it's difficult to kind of know where the line is with what can actually be centered in your syllabus. But if you provide your learners with choice, they can choose topics that are meaningful to them. And that might be centering a queer or trans book or a queer or trans themed resource. So that's a good way to get around the legislation a little bit. Some more strategies for supporting LGBTQ learners. Becoming familiar with the exact laws of the given state. I'm going to provide you all with a resource that is really, really important to kind of keep up with the legislation because it is unfortunately always changing and usually expanding. Again, drawing attention to resources outside of the institution. So your institution may have affinity groups that are already in place, but if a student is in crisis and needs some support that maybe the institution can't offer in the moment or is not able to offer at all because of the legislation, having resources outside of the institution can really make a huge difference. Building trust and community with students so that they are able to either confide in you or look to you for support. Exercising sound judgment on being visible. So because you are here, I know that you all want to support your queer and trans students, but it's important not to put yourself or your own position at risk because these laws are particularly insidious towards teachers and educators. It's important that you, as somebody who is an ally or is queer or trans, to make sure that your safety is not at risk in doing this work. Again, push for LGBTQ plus inclusion and trainings. This is especially important in states where DEI offices, DEI initiatives are not strictly prohibited. And then striving to build a constant community and support system. Students are going to graduate, hopefully, that is what we all hope for, but faculty are usually more constant and administrators. So it's really important to have that kind of network within an institution that isn't going to shift over every 4 or 6, however many years. And here are some additional resources. So here's where you will find past brainstorms, the resource compilation that I was mentioning with legislation trackers, some rubrics to check if your syllabus is equitable and you're using some different resources so that it's gender balanced and stuff like that. And then these slides are also within the Google folder that this will take you to. And you can either scan the QR code or there is a URL link at the bottom.
And I have typed that URL link in the chat as well.
Thank you so much.
People can just click it.
Now I want to open it up. I'm not sure how much time exactly we have, but I think we have a good chunk.
We do.
Amazing. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat. And I'm going to give it another minute so that anybody who wants to can scan the QR code, and then I'm going to exit out of the presentation so that we can have a conversation. Yes, please, Chelsea.
Hi, Arrow. It's so great to have your perspective here today. And I'm just curious which media sources you rely on to get the most accurate, up-to-date information about the legislation.
Yeah, I think that is a really great question. Thank you so much for asking it. I am grabbing my information from a huge variety of different resources, including those that are centering a more right-wing perspective. I think that it's important to be kind of immersed in those conversations and not just rely on one type of media source. So social media has been definitely one that I find is scattered around the political spectrum. And I think it's a way to get a lot of perspectives in like floating around in my mind. So I would recommend just kind of exploring a little bit, and also some more mainstream like news media coverage has been helpful. I'm not sure if that answers your question totally, but
which social media sites do you use the most?
I would say the one that I'm currently using the most is actually Instagram and TikTok. Those are the ones that I've noticed the most like conversations happening, especially in the comments section, honestly, of people kind of both having it out and supporting each other. So it's kind of like both ends of it are able to be seen through there.
I think maybe at the end of the session, would you be willing to share some accounts that you follow on social
Yes,
media?
of course, yeah.
Instagram maybe, or TikTok, just so we can educate ourselves as well through that.
Definitely. I might put them in the additional resources folder just so that I don't have to scroll through and keep everybody on. But yeah, great question. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
And I also want to encourage you all to connect with me on LinkedIn. And if you have any questions that aren't able to be answered within this session, please feel free to contact me. This is my undergraduate email. Unfortunately, I cannot keep my Harvard email for more than 3 months after I graduate. So I figured this is the best way to stay connected.
Arrow, in the chat, Carlos asks when to ask for a personal pronoun. And I know you mentioned that it's not something that you would require, but in terms of when you would encourage people to share them if they wish.
That is a great question. And I think my answer might frustrate a couple people, but it's a very individual question. So it definitely depends on the relationship that you have with this person. If you are in an educator role and they are your student, I think it makes sense to ask them what they would prefer to be referred to as. If it's a passing interaction with somebody, I would say it might feel a little bit jarring for somebody who is not out to be asked for their pronouns, if you're just interacting with them for a minute. But definitely if you are interacting with somebody over and over and it makes sense that you would need to refer to them with pronouns, you should ask them. And there's no shame in asking. I think the problem lies in when you require it. Like in Google Forms this is just based on my own experience. If a professor sends me a Google form where the pronouns field is required, like prior to the start of a class, I feel a little bit prickly because it just puts some people who might not be out or might not be comfortable sharing their pronouns in a particular setting in a kind of a sticky situation where they have to either misgender themselves or out themselves. Someone put in the chat, I use an index card at the beginning where they write their name and the name they want to be called, along with their pronouns, so that the request is just between me and the students. That's amazing. Yeah, I think it's definitely difficult at the start of classes to kind of build those bonds and build that community. A lot of my experiences have been like going around in a circle, and that can be a bit nerve-wracking because then you're announcing your identity to an entire room of people that you just met. So I think the index card idea is definitely a really great strategy. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yes, yeah.
And I imagine that it's still something that you want to give them the choice, right? Because
yes.
if the instructor starts using a pronoun that might not be anticipated, then the instructor risks outing that student if they don't wish to be known. So. So I have a question on a slightly different topic, and that's, you know, one, like as Chelsea hinted, like what are ways that we can get more informed? You've provided resources about legislation, but for online learning in particular, one thing that we know during the pandemic, at least, is two different groups of students had less success because they felt less supported. One was students with disabilities, and others were students in the LGBTQ plus community. And so I'm wondering, for instructors in online courses, you know, I loved the idea from the Mentimeter of incorporating authors that are part of that community and things like that. But as an instructor, how do we create safer spaces for real dialogue? Again, that wouldn't require someone to state their identity out loud, but could have conversations about it, so that we're creating a community that's okay with having conversations. Is that too long of a question? I'll try to summarize it, but I hope you understand what I'm trying to figure out how we can create safer spaces as online educators for LGBTQ community members to feel comfortable participating.
I think so. I'm holding two different threads of your question, and I hope that it becomes coherent at some point in my answer. One of the things that I have been thinking a lot about is representation in materials and also authors. So I also really appreciated whoever put that in the Menti word cloud. I think that can be a really great way to signal to LGBTQ students that you are kind of a safer instructor in terms of the institution broadly. I think it's really important as well to kind of hold yourself accountable for making mistakes. If you are attempting to include these resources and a student comes up to you and says, hey, this resource actually made me feel uncomfortable for these reasons. Maybe it wasn't the representation that they were hoping to see within the class. So making sure that you are open to critique and feedback from your students. I think another really key thing is to always be in conversation with your students. They are the experts of their own experience. We all know that. That is something that you're probably sick and tired of hearing from panelists, but it's really important to ask your students what would make them feel most comfortable. I think a way to do that is literally just to ask them or to have them fill out a Google form to see what they would be interested in seeing from you as a professor. And being open to conversations either synchronously or asynchronously with your students in that vein. Does that make any amount of sense?
It totally does. And I could see taking it one step further, in addition to being open to accepting feedback, asking for it.
Yes.
Saying, if I make mistakes, please let me know. My goal is that, to grow alongside you, to learn alongside you. And so I think that would be something that I intend to take away from that bit of advice.
And yeah, I just want to add one one piece onto that, because I have had professors who have been really, really forward about saying that they are open to critique and feedback. And then when a student actually critiques them, it doesn't go so well. So I think the key part of that is to actually be open to the feedback and be confident enough in yourself to have those conversations and admit that you're wrong. Uh, I think that's the piece that is missing from some professors' practice that I have encountered, at least.
Thank you so much.
Can I also ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Carol, so my question is about wording, and I really believe in the power of words. And when we include a statement in our syllabus, or when we include something in our materials, PowerPoint, whatever. So do you think gender identity is a better word, or sexual identity is a better word, or should we use them together? The reason I'm asking is I always use gender identity, and then I get a criticism from someone saying sexual is a better representation, sexual identity. And then I started using both. But do you have any suggestions on the wording part of it?
I do, and I was just reminded to stop sharing this presentation so that we can actually see each other and talk to each other. So definitely I have some suggestions. I think the critique that you received makes a lot of sense to me, because it's kind of excluding some people from that definition. So I would definitely say gender identity and either sexual orientation or sexuality, or sexual identity. That is another term, but the ones that I've heard most often are sexuality or sexual orientation, just because gender identity and sexuality are both aspects under the umbrella term of LGBTQ, but they are different. So gender identity is more internal, and then sexual orientation is more external and related to relationships. But yeah, that was an awesome question. Thank you so much for raising it.
Thank you for clarifying it. Thank you.
I do have another question, actually.
Yeah, of course, please.
Because in the previous discussion, we were talking about asking our students, and that was just brought up again. And I'm wondering if asking or involving our students can ever tip into placing a burden on the student or singling them out, and just curious what your thoughts are, where the line is.
That is a really great question. And the thought that immediately popped into my mind while you were saying it was, students are experts of their own experience, but they are not the experts, period. They're not to be thought of as the spokesperson for any identity group, regardless of what they may share or not share with you. So I think, to answer your question, it can definitely tip into more of like a tokenizing, I would say. But I think it's still really important to have that open dialogue with students, and I think encouraging them to tell you when you should do your own research and kind of come back to the conversation having learned some more context or some more information that might help you better prepare for the conversation is important, because involving them in discussions regarding their identity, if they have shared it with you, is really important. But also, of course, you don't want to make them the spokesperson for that identity, and you want to do your own learning to accompany the learning that you get from them. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yes. Thank you.
I'm gonna check the chat to see. Oh, yes, of course. Kevin already shared it. Amazing. The Menti link. Yes, this is wonderful.
I could
Amazing.
ask another question as well, if
Please
nobody else
do. I was
does.
just looking at the chat.
Um, are there any examples of assignments that have been really effective in class that have addressed LGBTQ plus issues or open dialogues?
That is an incredibly great question. I have only ever been really on the side of students, so I can speak to my own experience as a student. When I was in undergrad, I had a professor assign I guess you would call it a project, that was incredibly open. So it provided a lot of flexibility for students to kind of take it in the direction that they wanted to. And it was a program proposal for professional development in schools. So the proposal that I put forward was training for teachers to learn a little bit more about gender and sexual identities. Just because that's something that I'm incredibly passionate about and it's close to my heart. And I think being able to bring the knowledge that I had from my own experiences into an academic setting and have it be celebrated in that way was really impactful for me. And to kind of see my work moving forward into the future, to think about what I would be now studying to do in graduate school. So I think providing a lot of choice and freedom to engage with topics, especially in states where it's kind of difficult to put that into your curriculum at the start, is a great way to kind of find that loophole and get around that legislation. Does that make sense?
That's really helpful. Yeah, thank you.
We have about 3 more minutes. Do any other participants have questions for Arrow, either through the chat or use the microphone?
And I also want to encourage anybody who has a different answer to me to chime in for any of the questions that we've heard so far. I would love to get other perspectives or other knowledge.
Hi, my name is Maureen and I'm an instructional designer. And part of what we try to do is incorporate images into the content of our courses to create that welcoming environment. Have you experienced where someone has gone overboard? You know, that they're just, I'm going to make sure everybody knows that they're so included here, that they just do too much? And do you have any advice for how to approach including, you know, imagery in a course site?
That is a really great question, and I have experienced that. There was one syllabus from my undergraduate institution that essentially kind of, I don't want to say it like that. It looked like a rainbow threw up on the page. And it was so overboard, I would say. So I'm trying to think of ways to kind of walk that line. And I'm not sure if I have an answer, but I think if the imagery is just like, if you get somebody in your network to look at the page or at the website or whatever you are. Oh, Chelsea put something in the chat. Yes, ask colleagues for feedback. That's exactly what I was gonna say. So if you ask someone for feedback and they say these images are really distracting at this point, not in a way that it's like homophobic or something like that, like they don't even want any imagery on the page, but like the images are a little bit too much, so it's distracting from what the message that you're trying to get across. I think that that is a really helpful maybe metric to go off of. If that helps, I'm sorry.
No, it does. I mean, we have the same thing happen with including images of people who have disabilities. You know, it's like instead of people working together and you can tell that it's a group of, you know, with that a very diverse population, it's like you're highlighting these particular areas rather than, you know, incorporating everyone into each other's environment. So thank you.
Definitely. Chat. An outdated MySpace page. That's definitely feedback. You're sending a signal and putting pictures of it. Yeah, absolutely.
And I put one resource in the chat in other presentations, and I know Jeff Suarez Grant, who's here, has done presentations on representation and imagery. But there is a group that has put together the Gender Spectrum Collection, and their goal is to not do what you mentioned, making it look like a rainbow threw up on the page, but instead portray people with different gender and sexual identities as just people who have careers, people who have relationships, and so I myself have visited the site, but I can't speak to whether or not I feel like it represents that community. So your community.
Yeah. I think this is a really, I also haven't visited this page, but the description of it sounds like the goal is to kind of broaden the perspective and kind of the bucket that trans people often fall into in the eyes of people who are not trans. So kind of trying to expand the definition and the perception of what being trans or non-binary means. I love that idea. That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing it, Kevin.
Okay, well, maybe since we have gone past the quarter hour, do you have any closing thoughts that you want to share with us? Words of encouragement or anything else before we conclude? And thank you for leading an amazing discussion.
Yes, yeah, definitely. I would love to thank you all for being here at this session. I think this is a really important first step. Definitely looking into the resources that I provided and doing your own research is another important action step for the future, just so that your learning is not confined to a single discussion. Yeah, I'm honored to have been a presenter and be in conversation with you, and I hope to stay connected.
Excellent. Well, perhaps if you want to put your email address back in the chat one more time. And yes, everyone, please join me in thanking Arrow for an amazing session.
Thank you so much, everyone.